Hello and welcome to Press Review for Friday, December 13th. I'm Carmen Cracknell. Today we'll be joined by Gwyn Williams from Feed the Hungry as we take a look at the ongoing Syrian refugee crisis, and we'll also look at the latest on John Kerry's trip to Palestine and Israel. But first, let's begin with the UK papers. The Guardian leads its front page reporting on independent reviews calling for a new police force to tackle fraud in the wake of the horsemeat scandal. It also reports on George Osborne announcing a fresh attack on Britain's welfare budget, as he told MPs he would prefer to cut benefits than slash the size of the state, and reports on David Cameron being criticised by a Crown Court judge for publicly backing Team Nigella. The Independent leads its front page reporting that as political leaders fail to agree a deal on MP salaries, insiders are predicting a hair-shirt election in 2015, with voters penalising and candidates who say they will accept the proposed 11% increase. It also continues coverage on the death of Nelson Mandela, reporting on how South Africa has botched Nelson Mandela's passing. The Daily Telegraph leads its front page reporting on comments from Ian Duncan Smith, who says that migrants whose English is judged to be so poor that they would struggle to find work in Britain should be denied benefits. It also reports on the interpreter from Nelson Mandela's memorial, who has come under fire for his fake sign language, claiming that he was hallucinating and saw angels come into the stadium. The Times leads its front page reporting on new figures that reveal fewer than a quarter of benefit sheets were prosecuted for floating the welfare system last year. It also takes a look at Nigella Lawson's trial and features Emma Thompson, who has been nominated for a Golden Globe for her performance as Mary Poppins' creator in Saving Mr. Banks. Now let's take a look at the top stories in the Middle East. As Syrian refugees continue to pour into neighbouring countries and the EU, let's take a look at what the papers are saying about the escalating crisis. Politics.co.uk features an article by Ian Dunt titled "Syria Falls Apart, but Britain Offers No Places at All to Refugees," after Amnesty International criticised Britain's failure to offer a single place to refugees fleeing the fighting. Dunt says the UK has failed to participate in any refugee programme, leaving just 10 EU states offering places, and even then only 12,000. According to the article, Secretary-General of Amnesty International Salil Shetty said, "The number of those the EU is prepared to resettle is truly pitiful. Across the board, European leaders should hang their heads in shame." According to the article, more than 2.5 million people have left Syria since the outbreak of the civil war, the largest movement of people since the Second World War. Some 5,000 Syrians are thought to be fleeing the country every day. Over half are children. The refugee influx is most pressing in Lebanon, as the article states. 1 in 5 people in Lebanon are now Syrian refugees. Iraq is sporadically closing its borders, and there is tension in Turkey and Jordan. Analysts claim that the UK border agency routinely rejects applications only to have them succeed on appeal. In 2012, 52% of appeals against rejected asylum claims were allowed for Syrians. According to Dunt, the UN has urged Western countries to take in up to 30,000 Syrians by the end of 2014. But in the background, the EU is also pushing back Syrians into the region, with millions of euros going towards consolidating controls preventing Syrians reaching Turkey. The UN News Centre features the article "Lebanon as Winter Storm Bears Down, UN and Partners Ramp Up Aid for Syrian Refugees." As winter sets in, the article says, the United Nations and its humanitarian partners are ramping up efforts to assist more than 800,000 Syrian refugees in Lebanon who are facing the onslaught of cold weather, rain and snowfall as the Alexa storm hits the region. The UNHCR said it is particularly concerned for the many refugees in Lebanon living in makeshift accommodation, as their homes are fragile and substandard. The number of refugees in Lebanon has increased 5-fold over the last year. The article says that the UN World Food Programme and its partners are meeting the food needs of newly arrived Syrian refugees in areas affected by the storm in Lebanon, with enough food stocks to feed 150,000 people. Elsewhere in the country, the agency is providing food assistance to over 600,000 Syrian refugees registered with UNHCR using electronic food vouchers. UNHCR Special Envoy Angelina Jolie said, "We will look back with shame on this period and be haunted by our collective failure to prevent this killing of innocents. We have it in our power as an international community to prevent another 1,000 days of bloodshed and suffering." UNHCR noted that Lebanon is at present the largest Syrian refugee hosting country in the region, with 838,189 Syrians either registered as refugees or awaiting registration. Unlike other countries neighbouring Syria, there are no established refugee camps. The Lebanese Daily Star features an article by Antoine Amrieh titled "Harsh Weather Ravages Expose Syrian Refugees," about UN relief efforts to Syrian refugees after the onslaught of the brutal storm. According to Amrieh, in a statement, the agency reiterated its concern for many refugees living in makeshift accommodation, as their homes were fragile and substandard. Some 125,000 refugees living in the Bekaa Valley have already received winter kits, and 55,000 more will be reached in the coming days. The article added UNICEF raised concerns for children residing in flimsy tent settlements, saying that exposure to the cold put more strain on their health and was a real threat to their survival. Caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati said the international community had failed Lebanon in meeting the overwhelming needs of Syrian refugees, adding, "Lebanon has never hesitated to carry out its humanitarian duties towards the Syrian refugees, but Lebanon is disappointed with the international community for neglecting humanitarian considerations. The international community did not take steps in accordance with the needs and the limited capabilities of the Lebanese state." Valerie Amos, the UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, said her meeting with Mikati centred on the effects of the Syrian crisis in Lebanon in terms of the rising number of Syrian refugees and the burden this was having on the economy, particularly the health and education sectors. Caretaker Social Affairs Minister Wael Abu Faor said if the UN, with the help of the international community, can come to a decision with the Syrian regime to establish safe passages, this is the only possible solution to help displaced Syrians in their country and stop the influx into Lebanon. We are now joined by Gwyn Williams, Director of charity Feed the Hungry. Thank you for joining us, Gwyn.
It's a pleasure.
The Syrian refugee crisis has undoubtedly escalated and now winter is setting in. Do you think enough is being done by aid organisations to deal with the situation?
I think more can be done. I think that we're getting hold of the right urgency within Europe has been slow in getting the sense of urgency and the need, and I think with the oncoming winter storms that are coming or predicted for this weekend has sharpens people's attention to the desperate crisis that these people are going to be under over the coming weeks, and hopefully with everything that's happening in the news and through interviews like this today, it will really sharpen the focus of aid agencies to get more of the necessary aid out into the field.
What sort of conditions are refugees facing now that winter's set in?
Well, it's a terrible situation where where we're seeing people having to create fires with boots and with anything that they can get hold of because they can't get hold of firewood and normal kindling. That just really focuses people's attention that that these seeing the children barefoot in the snow is a real disparate situation. That people could be dying of frostbite, and which is totally unnecessary. It's a situation which is quite overwhelming, and with the fighting that's going on, that there's bound to be 1,000 more refugees going to be coming up through to the Lebanon, as well as to Turkey and other refugee camps as well.
And what sort of challenges do aid organisations such as yours face when getting aid to refugees?
It's the continuity of supply, getting the aid from the ports to the different points, because you have the organised camps, and then you have also the many camps that have been created by the refugees themselves, because of the appreciative situation that the Lebanese governments are under, not wanting to create official camps in the short term, because of the Palestine situation, where they've had refugees for nearly over 65 years. But with 800,000 people, these camps have got to be become more organised in the way that food and clothing and bedding and insulation is got to these people.
Do you think that Western governments are making enough efforts to ease the refugee situation, or could they be doing more?
I think they can be doing more. I think the understanding the political situation in the country has been very hard for European and Western countries to understand. And I think rather than imposing outside political solutions, they need to really get into the hub of the culture and understand how to help and distribute the aid with a better understanding of the need and the culture that it's going to.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Gwyn, for joining us today. As US Secretary of State John Kerry returns to the Middle East for a round of meetings with Palestinian and Israeli leaders, let's take a look at what today's papers are saying. Writing for Al Monitor, Daoud Kutab says the Palestinian government is resisting a US security plan it considers biased towards Israel. In its article, US-EU pressure Palestinians to accept security plan. Kutab says it might be a coincidence or hype from the Palestinian leadership, but a look at the narrative being weaved by the leadership, and one has no alternative but to think that the Americans and Europeans have joined the Israelis in trying to extract concessions from the Palestinians. Kutab adds that the European Union has been brought into the discussion as part of the implementation of an audit request where it's seen as targeting civil servants in Gaza who were asked to stay home rather than work for the Hamas-supported government. Palestinians believe that this call is not an innocent request, but that the Europeans are acting on behalf of the US and ultimately Israel. Furthermore, Kutab says that sources within the headquarters of Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, told Al Monitor that the Americans have expressed their intent for a public ceremony to celebrate the agreement, which John Kerry is bringing in his new visit. Kutab says that the sources added that Abbas is said to be very unhappy with the way the United States has turned against the Palestinians. The Palestinian leadership feels that it is paying the price of a US attempt to repair its ties with Israel after the rift over Iran. He concludes it is said that timing is a powerful diplomatic tool. If the above sanctions by the United States and Europe are in fact connected to the peace talks, it will represent the first time in these particular talks that they have taken a position that leans toward one side, while claiming to be an honest broker. Lebanon's Daily Star features an editorial piece where it asks what exactly John Kerry hopes for in his latest visit to the Middle East in its article, Last Call. The paper says as US Secretary of State John Kerry landed in the Middle East Thursday evening, his 9th visit since February, the region was left wondering what exactly he hoped to achieve this time round, or perhaps he had simply developed a taste for the local shawarma. Referring to Kerry's previous trip last week in which he revealed a new security plan allowing Israel to retain control of security in the Jordan Valley, the paper says, obviously, it was welcomed by Israel and lambasted by the Palestinians, who have rejected the plan. If Kerry is indeed here to try and find new support for the plan, it was a completely wasted journey. The other reason the paper points out is that maybe Kerry is trying to manage the general situation so it does not look like yet another dramatic failure of US foreign policy, another instance of the United States promising something but failing to deliver. The paper continues to say America's sudden interest in the Middle East peace process, signalled by Kerry's flurry of visits to the region, which he has joked is his commute, is not down to any commitment to justice or human rights or freedom, for then they would have been working earnestly on the issue since 1948. Instead, they have just finally woken up to the fact that the issue is not going away anytime soon. The paper believes that the coming days will reveal whether or not Kerry has something new up his sleeve, so perhaps we should give him the benefit of the doubt. However, the Palestinians have said they do not want an interim deal, but rather a commitment to all final status issues. Kerry said last week that a resolution was closer than ever. Would he really say that if it didn't bear any element of truth? It concluded that now is the time for the US to stand up for Palestine and to show that it can break away from Israel. A Palestinian state will not be achieved through words alone, nor through echoing Israeli policy. Writing for Palestine Chronicle, Nicola Nasser takes a look at Kerry's trip in his article From Mediator to Antagonist, Kerry's Coup. Nasser says US Secretary of State's John Kerry's last proposal of security arrangements have backfired and are now snowballing into a major crisis, with Palestinian negotiators who view Kerry's ideas as a coup, turning the US top diplomat from a mediator into an antagonist. Nasser says Kerry's shuttle diplomacy during his current trip seems more aimed at controlling the damage his ideas proposal caused than at facilitating the deadlocked Palestinian-Israeli bilateral talks. Nasser says Kerry and his administration have obviously coordinated a political coup by the adoption of the Israeli preconditions for recognising a Palestinian state almost to the letter, turning the Palestinian priorities upside down and changing the terms of reference for the Palestinian-Israeli negotiations. He adds that obsession with Israel's security could not be interpreted as simply a naive commitment out of good faith, but an old-hand veteran of foreign policy like Kerry. More likely, Kerry is dictating to and pressuring the Palestinian presidency with the only option to take his proposal or leave it, to be doomed either way by its own people or by the US-led donors to the PA. With friends like Kerry, Palestinian Arabs, Abbas for sure needs no enemies. He adds that, ironically, Kerry's ideas create a solid political ground for a Palestinian consensus that would be an objective basis for ending the Palestinian divide and reviving the national unity between the PLO in the West Bank and Hamas in the Gaza Strip as a prerequisite to be able to stand up to Kerry's coup. He concludes such a development, however, remains hostage to a decision by President Abbas, who is still swimming against the national tide because he has made peacemaking through negotiations only the goal of his life and political career. Now let's take a look at the top headlines from international papers. Russia's Moscow Times leads its front page with the headline, Putin declares offshore crackdown. The International New York Times leads its front page with the headline, Belgium nears law on child euthanasia. UAE's Gulf News leads its front page with the headline, UAE and India sign crucial investment protection pact. finally, China's Global Times leads its front page with the headline, "Aid targets China at summit." For more updates, please visit levant.tv. That's all we have time for today. Please be sure to join us on Monday for another press review.